All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Mindgasms. So, I am Andrew, aka Sexy Vampire Mindgasms, for the purposes of this video, and I'm going to talk about the author Anne Rice's famous Vampire Chronicles series. I'm going to do kind of a rapid review of the first 6 books and focus on specific weird sexual aspects of them, like the heavy homoerotic undertones throughout the books, the pedophilia aspect, where the basically the main character vampire in all of the books except for the first one, Interview with the Vampire, in which the main character is Louis, played by Brad Pitt in the movie. Lestat is the main character in all the other books, played by Tom Cruise in Interview with the Vampire, and Stuart Townsend in the Queen of the Damned movie. And I think it's Louis in Interview with the Vampire who makes Claudia, a child, into a vampire, who is played by Kirsten Dunst as a child, and then they develop a more romantic relationship, which gets much more romantic, and I don't think explicitly, but just have with heavy undertones of sex between them in the book, and then there's this weird incest aspect where Lestat in, I think it's book 2, because book 2 is the vampire Lestat. It goes more into his story, and it goes into him after he becomes a vampire, making his mother into a vampire, and then falling in love with her, and they have a very incestuous love relationship with lots of incestuous sex. It seems like if you're a vampire, you kind of can have sex with anyone, really, which is weird in Anne Rice's Vampire Chronicles universe. And then the part of the 6th book, which is the Vampire Armand, that made me bail on the series, is this explicit BDSM and gay sex scene between the Vampire Armand and his master at the time. And, I'm mildly bisexual, so I'm not homophobic, but I still don't want to read a book about fucking gay BDSM scenes. I want to read a book about vampires. It's like, I wanted to read about vampires, not fucking gay BDSM. All right, so anyway, I'm going to go through the trailers just for Interview with the Vampire, and also talk about the Vampire Lestat, and just focus on these weird sexual aspects of the books. So first here, I will go through the Interview with the Vampire trailer and kind of gloss over comparisons between the book and movie, and mostly, as I said, just focus on the weird sexual aspects there. All right, so here's Interview with the Vampire.
What do you say we get started? So you want me to tell you the story of my life? I'll tell you my story. I'll tell you all of it. I'm flesh and blood.
By the way, in case it wasn't obvious already, I'm going to give full spoilers for all 3, for both movies and all 6 of the first books. Well, I bailed on the 6th book, but all that I've read of the first 6 books.
But not human. I haven't been human for 200 years.
From the novel by Anne Rice. From Neil Jordan, the director of The Crying Game.
I've come to answer your prayers. Life has no meaning anymore, does it?
His name is Lestat.
What if I could
Tom Cruise, the only time he's ever been blonde in a film, I believe.
give it back to you? Pluck out the pain and give you another life. One you could never imagine. I can see you lying on a bed of satin.
He chose one man. He gave him infinite power, eternal life, and a daughter who would be forever young.
Oh, that's Armand. That's Armand, who we find out later on. I think it might even be in book 1, but if not in book 1, it's in the Vampire Lestat. There's a fucking mosquito buzzing around here. We find out that Armand made Lestat, who is played by Antonio Banderas in the movie, of course. And let's just go back here. I'm gonna go back to this statue, because that's an interesting.
Who would be forever young.
And yeah, we should talk about Claudia there too. So also, an interesting aspect of vampirism in Anne Rice's Vampire Chronicles is that when you become a vampire, your senses get super heightened. So you have like superhuman vision and superhuman hearing, superhuman smelling, superhuman taste and touch and all that kind of stuff. And that kind of contributes to the heavily erotic tones in the books that are even more extreme in the books than they are in the movie. And then, of course, there's Claudia here, played by Kirsten Dunst. When I think, well, the character is 12, and I think Kirsten Dunst was actually 12 at the time too, if I understand correctly. Oh, I gotta kill this fucking mosquito here. Sorry, ADD. Anyway, yeah, that's a weird sexual aspect the of the movie and the book, which gets way more extreme in the book, as I said, which is kind of interesting from a philosophical perspective, right? Because the I think it's once her character has been a vampire for 60 years, so her mind is basically that of an old woman, but she's trapped in the body of a 12-year-old girl for eternity. So she's sexually attracted to adults, like for example, Brad Pitt in the form of the adult vampire who made her, because like Lestat, he was an adult when he became a vampire, and you are eternally in the body that you were in when you became a vampire once that happens. So there's an interesting dynamic that the mind of a full-grown woman who's in her 60s is tortured by the fact that she's forever trapped in the body of a 12-year-old girl, which is why it actually is interesting and like an interesting exploration in terms of immortality and sexuality, because it's so creepy on the outside, right? Like this little girl is having sexual thoughts about adults, and then, as I said, particularly in the book, Louis ha- Louis has like a romantic relationship with her, and they really are in love like a couple or lovers are, even though he is, well, like as I said, he has the body of an adult and she has the body of a 12-year-old girl rather. But the like I said, with all of the weird sexual aspects in this, it's almost like when they become immortal, they get kind of like, they have this idea that they kind of ascend to a higher level of consciousness, and they view sexuality that way somewhat in the books or something like that. But then there's also this interesting juxtaposition of all the vampires being like miserable and cynical, evil, murdering psychopaths all the time. So you can have these immortal superpowers, but it's going to mean that you're miserable and feel alone and are capable of and have no problem morally with evil also. But so it's like it changes your morality to being evil too.
This is the only real evil left. And then he took the light of day.
You're a vampire who never knew what life was until it ran out in a red gush over your lips. I can't stand this any longer.
You made us what we are, didn't you?
God kills indiscriminately, and so shall we.
And of course, there's that common aspect that I love about vampires in general, of them seeing themselves as gods, because they're immortal and they live forever, and they essentially can't be killed other than in a limited number of ways with special things, like depending on which vampires we're talking about, crosses, beheading them, burning them, staking them through the heart, and a number of other ways depending on the series.
Do you like dying? You condemn me to hell! Monster. One happy Helen.
He turned
and we. End her suffering and yours. For do not doubt, you are a killer.
I want some more.
Yeah, when
Tom Cruise, Brad Pitt, Stephen Ray, Antonio Banderas.
yeah, there's Armand and Kirsten Dunst, and yeah, there's that interesting aspect that actually in the movie and the book about how when Claudia first becomes a vampire, she's just like a bloodthirsty murderer, like Lestat is when he has first become a vampire, and he's that way around Louis when he makes him a vampire, but Louis at first feels really guilty about killing, so he feeds on rats at first. He doesn't have the same instinct for like just wanton murder that Claudia has when she's made into a vampire. So that's interesting too.
Kirsten Dunst and Christian Slater. Interview with the Vampire.
Yeah, Christian Slater is the guy who Brad Pitt, aka Louis, tells his story about being a vampire too. And it's interesting that character in the ending of the movie is different in comparison to the book in that way because in the movie, of course, Louis lets Christian Slater's character go, and then uh, Lestat, aka Tom Cruise, he basically just alights upon the back of his car because vampires can fly in the Vampire Chronicles, and he makes him into a vampire while he's driving. Whereas in the end of the interview with the vampire book, Louis actually makes Christian Slater's character into a vampire at the end of the book, and then throughout books 2 and 3, and I think in books beyond that too, they actually have a sexual relationship too. So there's not just like overt homoerotic undertones. There's actually a homosexual relationship in that, but it's not explicit. It's more implicit, kind of like the pedophilia relationship between Louis and Claudia is too. But then, of course, as I alluded to later in the Vampire Armand, there's a super fucking explicit BDSM and gay sex scene, which just kind of turned me off for the rest of the series. But like I said at the beginning of this, though, I think the first 3 books in this series, The Interview with the Vampire Lestat, and The Queen of the Damned, are really good, but after that they kind of go downhill for me, and then the 6th one was where I bailed because it was like 100 pages of just homoeroticism, and then it culminated or climaxed, to use a funny pun, in an overt explicit BDSM gay sex scene. But so yeah, there's a lot of interesting stuff happening though, but some fucking weird sexual shit too, like I said, right? All right, so I think, yeah, I guess the only weird sexual aspect that I mentioned that they don't get into I don't think they get into this in the first book either. They kind of stick to one distinctly weird one per book, but as I said, it's mainly the pedophilia style relationship with Claudia as a 12-year-old girl vampire in Interview with the Vampire, between Claudia and Louis. So a romantic relationship between an immortal vampire who is more than 60 years old eventually in the story, who is in the body of the 12-year-old girl. Her sexual relationship with uh, a vampire who is at least 100 years old, I think, in the body of a man in his 20s. So the externally it looks like a man and a 12-year-old girl in a romantic relationship, but because they're immortal, they're both they're both more they're both psychologically adults. So it's disturbing and weird, but also interesting because it's vampires. And yeah, and also there's some super hardcore homoeroticism throughout all 6 of the books that I've read, especially between Louis and Lestat a lot. There's less of that, but it certainly is present between between Tom Cruise and Brad Pitt in the movie, but it's way more extreme than that in the book. They don't actually have sex, but they're always talking about it, like how they love each other and stuff like that. So yeah, there's that. But like I said, the weirdest sexual aspect of vampirism that Anne Rice gets into in Interview with the Vampire is the pedophilia relationship between Louis and Claudia. All right, so I'm going to go into the trailer for Queen of the Damned here because like basically I already mentioned that the only weird aspect of the Vampire Lestat, and this is a good book because it gets into, after the Interview with the Vampire story, it gets into more of the origin story of Lestat, because of course the Interview with the Vampire story is more the origin story of Louis, and then the rest of the novels, as I said, basically take place from the perspective of Lestat. So the Vampire Lestat book 2 is his origin story, and it talks about how the vampire Armand, played by Antonio Banderas, in the movie, is the one who made Lestat. And then also it gets into, I think it gets into this in book 3, that Marius made Armand. So Lestat made, no, actually can go down this really long chain. So Louis made Claudia, Lestat made Louis, Armand made Lestat, and Marius made Armand. And then it goes in book 3. It's really cool because it is for Queen of the Damned. It goes all the way back to the history of ancient Egypt, and vampirism going into that. And then in the book, in comparison to the movie, is way better because it gets into witches and redheaded twins that have telekinetic powers, and how witches formed cults that were worshiping vampire gods in ancient Egypt, and all sorts of interesting stuff. So I'll get into some of that, and again, mostly focus on the weird sexual stuff. I guess other than the incest and the pedophilia that I've already talked about in Queen of the Damned, which is my favorite one of the books. And I do like both of the movies, and I actually like the Queen of the Damned movie more than Interview with the Vampire, even though the Interview with the Vampire movie is much truer to the books than Queen of the Damned. And the movie actually starts off with part of the story uh, of the Vampire Lestat book, and then it goes into the Queen of the Damned book, and it changes a whole lot of stuff and focuses on some aspects that I think are less interesting, and doesn't even mention at all other aspects that I think are more interesting. But yeah, like I said, I'll get into that.
From an endless night, he will rise
See,
to
that's
seduce.
See, that's interesting too, because Stuart Townsend is a brunette, and of course, and of course, Tom Cruise there, as you know, is a brunette too. Although he probably naturally has gray hair now. Uh, but he was a brunette, brunette presumably before that, but they made him have blonde hair in the movie, because in the book the character of Lestat is blonde, yet Stuart Townsend, they just had his, I think, presumably regular regular brunette hair for this movie, and they didn't make him into a blonde. So I don't really know why they did that. One reason that I like the movie more than the books, though, is that I saw both movies before I read the books, and the Queen of the Damned movie doesn't have this extreme homoerotic vibe and undertone that the books and the Interview with the Vampire movie do. And I'm not like bothered by that, but I don't mind them having changed that, I would say.
To seduce the world.
I am the Vampire Lestat.
There's the Queen of the Damned. And of course, it just did a brief flash there of how Lestat basically the interview in the Vampire Lestat book, and this of course carries on into the Queen of the Damned book. Lestat becomes a rock star, and the interview with the vampire that the journalist played by Christian Slater in the first movie wrote, Lestat's story, got published as a book, and basically he exposed the fact that vampires exist, and then people started worshiping him as a cult leader, and he formed a rock band. That actually does happen in the book too, but in the movie they kind of combine this with the more interesting aspects of like the actual queen of the vampires, and all of the history and backstory behind that is by far the most interesting aspect of the book to me. They kind of just leave that all out and have her come and have Akasha, the Queen of the Damned, basically get resurrected by Lestat, and she goes on a killing spree, and then the other vampire elders want to stop her, and he is on her side for a while, but then it goes into them including this in this like giant world concert that Lestat and his band are doing. And one aspect that I like about the movie though is the soundtrack, because they had a bunch of artists work together making the score of the film, combining all of their musical styles. So there's Marilyn Manson, Korn, Static X, Chester Bennington from Linkin Park, and a whole bunch of other artists made a really cool soundtrack for it. But yeah, like I said, the book is way better and gets into a lot more detail and world building of the Vampire Chronicles.
I've hidden in the shadows for centuries. It's time to share myself with the world. Let me show you what it means to live in the light.
In his lust for mortal power, he will awaken an immortal evil.
She's Patricia, the queen of the...
Yeah, so that's cool. It's one of Aaliyah's few film roles, of course, too. Before she died at a young age. I don't actually know how she died. I'm gonna look that up. But yeah, obviously, I've only seen her in 2 film roles as Akasha, the Queen of the Damned, in Queen of the Damned, and also I forget what her character's name was, but she was also in a movie with Jet Li called Romeo Must Die, and she was kind of like the girl that he has to save. So that was an interesting movie too, and I like those Jet Li action movies. Doesn't say here. Oh, I was trying to ask how old was Aaliyah when she died. Oh, she died at the age of 22. Yeah, so she died really, really young. But how did she die though? Oh, she died in an airplane crash. Badly overloaded aircraft she was traveling in crashed shortly after takeoff, killing all 9 on board. Oh, okay. I didn't actually know how she died, but oh, that's tragic. A lot of rock stars and musicians die at young ages, seemingly. But it could just be that we know of a lot of examples like that, so it feels that way. But anyway, yeah, Aaliyah is a really cool character in, of course, even more of a cool character in the book, as I mentioned, and a cool character in the movie too.
The damned that will turn the undead.
She chose me.
Against each other.
She has no respect for anything except for the taste of blood, human and immortal alike.
Oh, that's Marius there, by the way, who, as I mentioned, we learn in the books, is the vampire who made Armand, and Armand made Lestat, and Lestat made Louis, and Louis made Claudia.
No war to possess our souls.
Vampire Civil War, with wars of vampire elders against vampire gods, or vampire god, and a vampire in the form of Lestat, who Akasha has made basically a demigod before he spoiler, of course, ends up turning on her, I think, and that's only they have to defeat the Queen of the Damned together, basically.
What have you done, Lestat?
From Anne Rice, best-selling author of Interview with the Vampire.
So I don't know if anyone knows this. Tell me in the comments why, for the movies, they skipped the Vampire Lestat and went straight from movie 1 to movie 3, from Interview with the Vampire straight to Queen of the Damned, instead of Interview with the Vampire, then the Vampire Lestat, then Queen of the Damned. I'm gonna actually Google that question too.
Directed by Michael Reimer. Queen of the Damned.
Come out, wherever you are.
Okay, so yeah, I'm gonna Google that question here actually. So actually, might as well screen share that. So going to look up, I'm looking, oh yeah. And was the Vampire Lestat movie never made? Okay. It's the second film in the franchise and blah, blah, blah. Queen of the Damned is considered an adaptation of both the Vampire Lestat and Queen of the Damned. No, it does have some of Vampire Lestat in there at the beginning, but hardly any of it at all. Was the Vampire Lestat made into? No, it wasn't. Why did they never make a sequel? They did, Queen of the Damned. But Warner Bros. Faced a race against time to make Interview with the Vampire 2, and thus it took a bit of a gamble. Doesn't really say why. Interesting. All right, anyway, so I'm going to get into now, basically kind of gloss over book 4 and 5 of the Vampire Chronicles in terms of those weird sexual aspects, specifically, and comparisons between the books and the movie also. And oh yeah, this one. I'm just going to go to my thumbnail while I talk about that here. All right, so yeah, so basically, yeah, book 4 is The Tale of the Body Thief, and I thought that was way worse than Queen of the Damned in my opinion, because there was so much less going on. There was no vampire backstory, world building, history of vampires, vampire gods, going back to ancient Egypt and tracing bloodlines all the way back to before Marius, who made Armand, who made Lestat, who made Louis, who made Claudia. And it basically is focusing on how Lestat develops this power and then shares and gives it to that. No, wait, no. It's Lestat develops that power, and then eventually through Louis, he gives it to, if I remember correctly, he gives it to Louis, and then Louis gives it to that journalist who wrote the Interview with the Vampire story, which is Louis's backstory in the Interview with the Backstory, or Interview with the Backstory, Interview with the Vampire book. And basically it's this power to switch your soul between different bodies, and it means that you can experience being a human again. So it's still interesting because Lestat in the novels especially, he hates life so much that he actually craves being a human again sometimes. So in this one, he switches bodies and gets to be a human again. And since the the journalist character was much older, played by Christian Slater in the movie, his character is much older in the books. So he's an old man in the Tale of the Body Thief book. So Lestat develops this power and is able to live in the body of a human being for a while by transferring his immortal soul there, because he still has the immortal powers of the vampire. But when he changes bodies, he loses his immortality powers too, and is just basically a regular human again. But he has the power to switch back to his vampire body also. And so basically that journalist, because he had the body of an old man and started like a gay relationship with Louis, an interview with the vampire, he also transfers his soul to a younger body. So they can both be humans in a gay relationship, which I thought that's interesting, but I don't really want to read, I'm not that interested in a story about vampires who become human again, because being a vampire sucks. So that's why I didn't like it as much as Queen of the Damned, and that was my favorite one. And then the next one after that, that was interesting, and I liked it more than The Tale of the Body Thief. That one was Memnoch the Devil. So basically, as you can probably expect from the title, it was literally about Lestat being tempted by the devil, and someone who literally calls himself the devil, and basically this more positive divine outlook on life. And he's very tempted and almost gets corrupted by the devil in the same way. Well, actually, at first he does, but then he eventually does a 180 and doesn't get totally corrupted by it, which is very similar to how Lestat gets corrupted at first by Akasha, the evil vampire queen of the damned, in the Queen of the Damned, but then eventually he works with the other vampire elders to destroy her. That's similar to how Lestat basically gets corrupted by the devil, but then eventually gets swayed to being slightly more moral, because he's kind of a bad guy, but just barely a good guy in some ways. In some of the books, he's more of a bad guy in some books than others. So he gets swayed to the morally good side after having been corrupted by the devil, and then turns on him. And then, like, you can't defeat the devil, but basically stops him from terrorizing Earth and all that kind of stuff. And basically convinces him to follow the divine moral order again, of how you can influence humans and vampires to commit evil, but you can't just like fully corrupt them and have yourself as the devil living on Earth, because it's against the divine moral order or something like that. So that was it. That was an interesting book, theologically speaking. And like I said, I like that book, Memnoch the Devil, more than Tale of the Body Thief. But now I will get into book 6, that is The Vampire Armand, that I mentioned to you is my least favorite. And I bailed on it because I thought, I'm trying to read about vampires, not gay BDSM. So this here again is Armand, played by Antonio Banderas in the Interview with the Vampire movie. And yeah, obviously The Vampire Armand is about his backstory. And it's interesting at first because it goes way back in time too. I forget when it is exactly. I think it began. I think it's set in ancient Egypt too. I'm going to look that up here. When is the Vampire Armand set? Follows the 3rd century. No, not Lestat. Armand. Oh, in Ukraine in the year 1480. Okay. Oh yeah, when his original name was Andre, and he was a talented young artist, but he became the slave of a rich man, and this rich man had several young boy slaves, so it's more like pedophilia and gayness, basically. Basically, the whole first part of the book that I read is all about Armand becoming this rich guy's slave and then eventually he turns him into a vampire. And then the part where I bailed on the book is, like I said, I don't really mind the strong homoerotic undertones, but and of course I forgot to mention too that like these guys do have sex with women too, so it's kind of like if you're a vampire, you're automatically bisexual and you're okay with having sex with anyone, even if it's incestuous or pedophilia or something like that. But like these men who seem borderline gay do have sex with women too, so they're kind of bisexual. But again, like I said, this whole first part of the book is just hardcore homoeroticism, more extreme than any other books. And then I bailed on the book, I think maybe 100 pages into it, when there was this really overt and explicit gay BDSM sex scene, basically, where the master got mad at Armand because Armand freaked out about something, and so then the master started whipping him, and then Armand pretended to like it, but then he actually accidentally literally got sexually turned on by it. So he got sexually turned on by being whipped, and then his master gave him a reach around and a hand job, and then it like describes him coming in his hand, and I'm like, ugh, I don't want to read this. I want to read about vampires, not gay BDSM. All right. So, yeah. So, all right. That is basically my rapid review of the first 6 books in Anne Rice's Vampire Chronicles, focusing mostly on those weird sexual aspects that I mentioned, because it's very strong eroticism plus vampires, as I mentioned, which is why I called the subtitle of this homoeroticism, pedophilia, incest, and BDSM with vampires, the subtitle of this video. So yeah, I hope you liked my exploration and explanation of the 2 movies versus the 6 books that I've read, or like 5 1/3 of books that I've read, or however you classify that, and these weird sexual aspects. Like I said, the first 3 books are really good in my opinion. The third one is my favorite, and even like the first 5 are worth reading, even though the 4th and 5th ones are not as interesting in comparison to the first 3, in my opinion. But yeah, check out all those books, and if you've seen the movies, see how they compare to the movies to you, and see if you notice all these extremely strong homoerotic undertones. And if you've already read these books and seen these movies, let me know what you think of all these weird sexual things, like these extremely homoerotic undertones, the literally gay BDSM and the incest and pedophilia. And let me know what you think of how you would rank the books and how you would compare them to the movies too. All right, so yeah, thanks everyone again for watching. Hope you liked my rapid review of 6 books. I can do that sometimes, even though I'll go through 1 paragraph of a philosophy book for 45 minutes sometimes. So yeah, check out those books and movies. The first 3 books are awesome, like I said, but then they go really downhill from there, in my opinion. Thanks for watching. Click that like button, click that subscribe button, share this everyone with all your friends, and so I can tell them all about sexuality and vampirism in Anne Rice's Vampire Chronicles. And click that bell to be notified when I come out with new videos. Check out my one from yesterday, which was my newest one on Cynical Theories, which is James Lindsay and Helen Pluckrose's massive dump of fucking misinformation about all the usual suspects that I defend often, such as postmodernism, critical theory, critical race theory, Marxism, etc. And don't know why my voice just cracked there. And yeah, check out next weekend. We will be talking about what we were going to talk about this week. My nerd friends Dusty and Tristram, who I do nerd fantasy chats with, will be discussing Shadows of Self, which is book 2 in era 2 of the fantasy author Brandon Sanderson's Mistborn series, which is kind of fantasy western and then turns into murder mystery and gets into divine intervention and trying to stop a terrorist in order to stop them from stop a demigod from trying to kill a god, and it gets really interesting. So check that out too, and also probably talk about some other political stuff, like one of the Jordan Peterson talking about that trans tweet that got him banned from Twitter with Kyle Kalinske, or him intellectually shitting all over postmodernism and showing not that he doesn't know what the fuck he's talking about again. Something like that sometime soon for the next one before the podcast, I think. So yeah, thanks again everyone for watching, and oh yeah, check out my Patreon page. The link is in the description of the video as always. And if you give me $10 a month, then you can vote on future topics, books, and movies that I will discuss both by myself and with others. And like I always say, I love you all. Keep being the tiny beam of light that shines through the impenetrable darkness, in the almost impenetrable darkness in the universe. And most importantly, always remember this: the funk cures all, and groove is in the heart, and vampires are awesome. And read Anne Rice's Vampire Chronicles. Check out those movies, Interview with the Vampire and Queen the Damned. Let me know what you think of them in the comments. Vampires are mostly awesome, but skip fucking Twilight. That's fucking terrible. Those are not really vampires. That's just mangling the concept of vampires. Fuck Twilight. All right. Thanks again, everyone, and adios until next time.